All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. This PowerPoint is on Thomas Jefferson. And again, if you want to split your screen, you can type in from the student version as I go along through the PowerPoint. All right, Thomas Jefferson, this purchase grew the U.S. and strengthened our government. This is regarding the Louisiana Purchase. We'll get to that in a second. And we'll talk about how he'll be our third president and some of the contributions that Jefferson made. So how did Jefferson chart a new course for the government? Again, he's running against John Adams, our second president, in 1800. The Federalists had supported John Adams, and the Democratic Republicans had supported Jefferson. So these two different political parties, this had been brewing for some time. The election of 1800 was viciously contested. The Federalists think of them as being in the North. They threatened civil war if Jefferson were elected. And the Republicans, they accused Adams of creating a monarchy, meaning the Federalists were too controlling, and their idea of the federal government was much more powerful than they felt comfortable with. Jefferson does defeat Adams, and he will win the election. Jefferson thought of his election as the Revolution of 1800. He wanted to change many of the policies of Washington and Adams. He wanted to limit the power of the federal government. He believed in the idea of laissez-faire, which means let alone or hands off. So at the bottom here, these changes were peaceful despite strong differences between these two political parties. Our Constitution didn't call for political parties, but they just happened nonetheless. And this revolution of 1800, as it turned out, there was no bloodshed, no civil war. What was the importance of the purchase and exploration of the Louisiana Territory? The idea of westward settlements sped up in the years after America's independence. More than 1 million settlers had lived between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi. So again, over time, since winning the American Revolution, many people pushed west, and this fueled expansion. Most Western settlers were farmers. They needed the Mississippi River. You can see by the arrow there, that was needed to get your product down to the Gulf of Mexico. Again, you would and then export your goods out of the port of New Orleans, and from there you could ship your markets to the Atlantic or overseas. Spain, they controlled the Mississippi River. And New Orleans. They threatened to close the port to American ships. This was prevented by the Pinckney Treaty with Spain in 1795, and this guaranteed Americans rights to ship goods down the Mississippi River. So this was, trade was vital for our Western farmers. Later, Spain withdrew Americans' right to ship goods down through New Orleans. Westerners demanded war with Spain. So again, this is something that is brewing, and it's going to affect Thomas Jefferson. To make matters worse, Jefferson learned that Spain had secretly given its Louisiana Territory to France. Jefferson feared that France would become dominant in America. He was concerned about that, and then his thought, if you look at the arrow, the French would therefore block American expansion out west, and he wanted to make sure that that didn't happen. Jefferson decided to try to buy New Orleans from the French. He sends Monroe and Livingston to Paris to make a deal. When they arrived in France, they discovered that the situation had shifted again. So remember, you don't have the internet. You don't have any kind of real-time communication. This took months of going back and forth. The French have been driven from their colony in Haiti. You can see that France is out there. Without Haiti, France would have trouble defending Louisiana in the event of a war. So they had no real way to stage anything. So this big purple chunk of land, that's the Louisiana Territory, that's now, it's questionable for France. France and Britain are considering war again. The French dictator Napoleon, he needs money for the war. All this is working in our favor. Because of France's situation, Monroe and Livingston, they get a great offer. France offers to sell everything. We were hoping just for the port of New Orleans, but again, France is going to sell everything to the United States. Again, it's one of those deal of a lifetime. After buying the Louisiana Territory, that's this green area here, You could see how it literally doubled the size of the United States. Jefferson wanted to set out and have it explored and mapped. Lewis and Clark, they leave St. Louis in the spring of 1804, and they explore the northern part of the Louisiana Territory. So you can see from these different trade routes that there's much interest in exploring the West. The journey of Lewis and Clark led many Americans to feel a sense of duty to expand west. They felt it was the privilege, the destiny of the United States, if you look at the arrow, to own from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And again, this was a time where, for the most part, people got along. They agreed. We'll come back more and do some activities on the Louisiana Purchase. But again, this is most undoubtedly the biggest contribution that Jefferson did in his first administration. All right, that's the end of the first section. Jefferson's latter term and some other issues. We'll talk about how Jefferson dealt with pirates, trade, various embargo acts, some famous terms and people. All right, how did Jefferson respond to threats to the security of the nation? Trade with Europe was crucial to the American economy. Again, we would send crops and natural resources to Europe. Europe would in turn make goods and sell them back to us. Pirates from the North African Barbary states began attacking American ships. Again, this is nothing new, but again, we were paying tribute, as other nations did. So we were, giving these Barbary coast states money, and again, they would, if they got enough money, they wouldn't attack our ships. And again, this is it's embarrassing. No country should have to pay a bribe to somebody to leave them alone. Jefferson stopped paying tribute. He sent warships to protect American merchant ships. The American ship Philadelphia was captured by the Barbary state of Tripoli. This is where the Marine Corps hymn mentions Tripoli. And American sailors led by Stephen Decatur, they burned the Philadelphia so the pirates couldn't use it. And albeit a loss of the ship, this inspired confidence that we could deal with, foreign enemies. A greater threat to America came from Britain and France. You could see that both these nations are squeezing us. They're at war. We still remain neutral, just like George Washington had recommended during his administration. Britain and France weakened each other by cutting off each other's foreign trade. So France didn't want us trading with Britain. Britain didn't want us trading with France. We are officially the pickle in the middle. France, along with Britain, they seized our ships, and this is nothing but problematic. We call that impressment, where, again, you're forced to serve in the Navy, and Britain especially did that. So thousands of Americans were forced to serve in the British Navy, a great humiliation to our young country. Jefferson used a peaceful method to force Britain and France to respect neutrality. He didn't want to go to war. He went and he imposed an embargo on American ships sailing to any foreign port. So again, Jefferson said that the embargo would stop these two powerful European nations from attacking our ships. They wouldn't get any of our resources, and thus they would stop. At least that's what he had hoped for. However, the embargo hurt America in many ways. The price of our crops declined because we weren't getting those out to market. Many Americans lost their jobs. American exports declined, and many people started to smuggle and just literally ignore the Embargo Act. So that's not good when people disobey, your lawful orders. Congress would repeal the Embargo Act just before Jefferson left office. Again, we would have reopened trade with all countries except France and Britain, and we said we would begin to trade with them when they respected our neutrality. So in the big picture, we're trying to assert ourselves as a young nation, and how do we deal with all these problems with various countries? Again, during this period, tens of thousands of American settlers moved westward, and this opened up all kind of troubles with Native American lands. You can see the green. This was American native land prior to colonization, and you could see as we go west. that more and more land is going to begin to disappear for the natives. Natives suffered from this expansion, from disease, the loss of hunting grounds. The power of their leaders declined. Shawnee leader Tecumseh organizes a fight against U.S. expansion, trying to resist the settlement. But ultimately, in the Battle of Tippecanoe, we're going to find that the Native Americans don't have the ability to stop westward expansion. And Tecumseh and his allies, they continued their opposition, but again, they never regained any kind of strength after the Battle of Tippecanoe. So these are some issues that occurred during Thomas Jefferson's 2 terms in office. After a second term, he respects George Washington's precedent to only serve 2 terms, and our next president will be James Madison, again, the father of the U.S. Constitution. A couple takes from Jefferson. Again, he wanted the federal government to be smaller. He accomplished that in his term. The Louisiana Purchase was a massive accomplishment for him. And in the second term, Jefferson ran into more problems. The Embargo Act wasn't that popular. However, people always did give Jefferson a pass because, again, he was the signer of the Declaration of Independence. Our nation became stronger. We were dealing with foreign threats. But again, the fight isn't over. We're headed toward a war with Britain, and that'll come with James Madison's term. All right, guys, thanks for listening. And email if you have any questions.